Support for the Capital Connection comes from
United University Professions, representing 37,000 academic and professional employees at SUNY campuses and teaching hospitals across New York State. Frederick E. Cole, President. UUPinfo.org. It's the Capital Connection. Hi, I'm David Gastina. A special program this week. I'm so excited about this, and it's with the New York State Inspector General, Lucy Lang, and a very special guest who many of you will probably know. We'll bring that guest in shortly. Now, the Inspector General's office is celebrating 40 years. They just handed me a report, a legacy of oversight. And that's what we're really talking about here when we're talking about Inspectors General. They had a huge celebration about this last night. And the fact is that in a country where the Trump administration purged over 20 inspector generals, we should be having a conversation about what an inspector general is, not only on the federal level, but on the state level, what that means, and why it's an important function in our government. Well, let's start with welcoming Inspector General Lucy Lang to the Capital Connection. So good to see you again.
Great to see you too, David.
Well, fresh from this event, which you partnered with the New York State Archives, New York State Museum, New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, Historic Preservation, you brought together leading experts, including one former Inspector General. This is Mark Greenblatt, who was one of these 20 Inspector Generals purged in the administration. You told me off air that these inspector generals, as we know, filed a lawsuit. Mr. Greenblatt stayed out of that so he could talk more about it. But give us a sense of what came out of this event.
I'm so excited to be here to talk to New Yorkers about our work, especially today, because it is exactly 40 years ago today that former Governor Mario Cuomo signed the executive order establishing the offices of the New York State Inspector General. But the legacy of inspectors general dates way back before that. And so coincident with America 250, we wanted to celebrate our 40th birthday and the American legacy of oversight here in New York, in large part because Baron von Steuben, who is credited as being America's first inspector general.
Say that name again. I love it.
Baron von Steuben.
The Baron.
The Baron. He served under George Washington and helped turn the tide of the war at Valley Forge and beyond. And he was responsible for establishing parameters and rules and regulations for the military that changed what was a volunteer force into a much more professionalized army. He, in fact, then went on to write the rules and regulations known as the Blue Book that still forms the basis for military rules.
And you had that Blue Book.
We did, in that. One of the original Blue Books is in the incredible collection of New York parks and historic preservation at Peebles Island. And we were so glad to have that and a number of other objects related to the Baron on site at the New York State Museum last night, including his pocket watch.
Well, I keep thinking about this quote that was above the chalkboard in my history class in high school. And it said, if we do not learn from our mistakes, we are doomed to repeat them. So knowing our history, and specifically the history of the Inspector General, is important for understanding our democracy. Can you help us with that a little bit? I mean, when you're talking about Baron von Steuben, we're going back to the Continental Congress days, aren't we?
That's right. And largely after those days, inspectors general were a military construct. And really about 150 years ago or so, the construct moved into the municipal context with the development of the Department of Investigations in New York City. And I was so thrilled to be joined by New York City's longest serving inspector general, former DOI Commissioner Rose Gill, who talked about the origins of that office, which stemmed from the scandals around Tammany Hall and was the beginnings of inspectors general in the civilian tradition, which led ultimately to the creation of the Federal Inspector General's Act that led to the development of what is now 73 IGs at the federal level, and a number of state and municipal IGs who have sprung up, including our office 40 years ago.
We're speaking with New York State Inspector General Lucy Lang. And I remind you, we have a very, very, very special guest coming up shortly on the program. So stay tuned. But one of the things that always bothered me, I guess, as a young person when I started studying politics was the realization that the lawmakers would not pass laws that would get themselves in trouble. right? Why hoist themselves on their own petard? And because of the potential for power and corruption and those kinds of things, you need an agency to watch over these folks. And in the end, it's about, as your mission statement says, fostering confidence in government, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It is so critically important, especially now, that there are nonpartisan, independent folks within government who have access to the materials and the people who run government in order to conduct investigations into allegations of fraud and corruption, but also who are able to do programmatic analysis for the kinds of services that serve everyday New Yorkers and Americans, as the case may be. So in addition to our investigations that may lead to criminal outcomes, we also assess a whole range of the kinds of programs that affect New Yorkers every day, from the prison system to the welfare system and everything in between.
You know, you spoke out right after the purging of these inspector generals. The Trump administration clearly is trying to remove oversight in all types of agencies. I mean, we're even seeing now with the Environmental Protection Agency trying to loosen rules for the pollution that goes downwind, and that means us in the Northeast. These kinds of things can make things worse, more dangerous, unhealthy, and can cost municipalities and states and the country money, wasted money, which is a big deal. But I wondered, you're not afraid, as so many people seem intimidated these days, to come out and speak out against the administration. How come, and why is it so important to speak out?
I feel so lucky to be a New Yorker now and always, to be in a state where I am granted the independence that's required to do my job, and to work in and amongst communities that care about these issues. And so I will, as long as I have a soapbox, be preaching the import of the kind of oversight that we do, both for the purposes of making government work better and for helping people understand that so much of government is working for them.
Yeah, we do spend a lot of time criticizing government, and yet many of the basic functions we come to rely on are a result of how government works. But you're there to make sure it's working and working right. And of course, another part of your role in looking over the state agencies is looking over the executive. So you also have to keep your eyes on the governor, and you have to have the sort of gut to do that. What gives you that confidence and ability?
I bring to this work the same values that I have brought to my whole career, starting as a prosecutor and working in the nonprofit sector. And that is really a commitment to the rule of law. So when we, for example, began an investigation several years ago after a shootout between a CUNY police officer and the NYPD, that led to us uncovering some deficiencies in CUNY's policies related to guns, we did a comprehensive look at how guns were handled across the executive agencies and discovered that there was a lack of consistency amongst them, that there was a need for changes with respect to how guns are handled on and off the job, to security related to state guns. And no one tried to stop us, as they shouldn't have, in saying the state's doing something wrong here and it needs to change. And thankfully, when we put the report out right away, there was a dramatic change in how gun policy is handled across the state for people who carry on behalf of the state. So that's an example of how our job is to make government work better and not to shy away from the hard and complicated questions.
Inspector General Lang, do you think just being the Inspector General has more oomph when you put out one of these reports? Because I talk to the State Comptroller, Tom DiNapoli, all the time, and he puts out reports advising to make better financial decisions and to change this policy and to do that. And he says, I can only put out the reports. They don't often listen to me.
Well, we do have the authority to issue recommendations that agencies are required to abide by, and then we have a practice of following up consistently over time until agencies get in compliance. We're lucky to work closely with the comptroller as well, and they are great partners in many of our investigations.
If you want to learn more about the Inspector General's office, it's ig.ny.gov. And if you have a tip, right, you take tips, you'll investigate. If something sounds a little funny, you'll take a look at it, call the OIG hotline at 1-800, I love this, 1-800-DO-RIGHT.
That's right.
1-800-DO-RIGHT. Well, let's now turn toward a special guest and talk about being in between these two powerhouses right now. We've got the Inspector General of New York State, Lucy Lang, and the Colonel, Stephen Lang. Now, Stephen Lang, if you don't know, he's an American actor, playwright. He's worked in film, TV, and theater. The latest film that you would see him in is that small film called Avatar, where he plays Colonel Miles Quaritch in that franchise. He's been in Gods and Generals. He played George Pickett in Gettysburg. He's appeared in Public Enemies, Don't Breathe, Maneater, Tombstone. On Broadway, Death of a Salesman, A Few Good Men. He's been in television. And last night, he was at this event with you, Lucy Lang. And we welcome now Stephen Lang. Did you ever think, Stephen, that it was the role of a colonel? Now you got a colonel and a general in the family.
I'm outranked, but good morning, David. And hello, General. How are you?
Good morning, Pops.
There's nothing new in me being outranked. I've been outranked by my wife and my daughters for years now, so it's okay.
Yeah, I bet it does. Quite a family and very generous. I will say this one little story in that I'm lucky to teach at UAlbany and have had many students go on to success. One of them is in our newsroom right now. Her name is Madeline Reynolds, and people should know, Stephen, that she reached out to you as a young person. You not only did an interview with her, which was an assignment for my class, but you invited her down to the house and were so generous and so kind. And I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome, and I'm glad that she's making a career in a field that she's passionate about. How wonderful.
Yeah, and I know how passionate you are as an actor. I can tell from every performance, but I imagine last night was extra special, right? Because you did some readings that deal with this issue, and I believe you've got one for us now. Tell us more.
Well, last night was a really extraordinary evening and very challenging for me because a good bit of what I read last night came from the Blue Book, which is to say the drill manual that von Steuben designed for the United States Army. And it's pretty dry stuff. I mean, when you hear somebody say, oh, I could listen to Anthony Hopkins read the phone book. Well, it's sort of like, oh, I could listen to Lang reading von Steuben's Blue Book. I'm not sure, you know. But anyway, it was interesting. It was challenging for me to kind of chew my way through that stuff. But we did close with a letter that I find extremely poignant that was written by von Steuben in 1790, 4 years before his death, and it was written to George Washington, President Washington. And, of course, Washington was not a man that one approached cavalierly in any way. Washington, in many ways, was very much the Mount Rushmore that we associate him with. So for von Steuben to do this he had to take a big gulp to do it. This letter is to George Washington, and it is dated, interestingly enough, the 29th of January, 1790, which means that this letter was written 236 years ago today.
Go ahead.
Sir, though sensibly impressed with the marks of confidence and friendship you have been pleased to manifest for me since my arrival in America, nothing but the most urgent necessity could induce me at this time to divert your attention from more important objects of national concern to the consideration of one which may be of a more personal nature. Unaccustomed to suffer pecuniary distress before I came to this country, the indigent situation to which I find myself reduced becomes every hour more insupportable. 7 years have now been spent in vain solicitations for the determination of a course, the justice of which was at all times acknowledged by a large and respectable majority of the old Congress. Flattered from session to session with the hopes of a determination in my favor, I have been induced to prolong my stay in this country until I have encumbered myself with debt and every possible resource exhausted. The immediate decision of Congress on my memorial presented at the last session is therefore become indispensable to my existence, and it is to solicit such official assistance as propriety may authorize in this respect that I now take the liberty to address you. The peculiarity of my situation is in every respect is submitted as the true reason for making the request. It is indeed peculiar. Whatever the decision may be, I shall at least be relieved from all the anxiety of mind which arises from expectations so long deferred. in whatever quarter of the globe I may be obliged to seek an asylum, the reputation I established in my own country before I left will always ensure me the esteem of every honest man, nor will this sentiment be lessened by the small share I have had in the glorious revolution of the United States. And as I shall have nothing to reproach myself with, I shall be able to support my situation, however reduced, without a blush. With the highest respect, I have the honor to be, sir, your most obedient and very humble servant, Steuben.
Bravo!
Wow. Stephen Lang, who was just reading that letter, American actor, playwright, so much more than that, really. How did you prepare for this? I mean, I immediately hear the accent and the effect, but how did you sort of get yourself into this role?
When I did the manual last night, I did not read it with any hint of an accent. I read it in a kind of a flat military voice, I think.
Okay.
But I felt that this letter is so deeply in character of the man that it was incumbent on me to at least make penetrate it a little bit, to displace my own self and see if I could channel a little bit of von Steuben. And so, I have to be perfectly honest with you, you go through the Rolodex in your mind of accents and see what comes out. Now, first of all, I don't think von Steuben spoke any English at all. But if he did, he would have done it with a Prussian accent. And was that a Prussian accent I did? Well, it was my Prussian accent today. That's all. It's really the content of the letter that I find so moving. There's so much about it. I love his reference to the old Congress. The old Congress was filled with people von Steuben knew and were friends of his. And now you've got all these new congressmen. He doesn't know them. And to them, he's just this sort of figure from the revolution, kind of a pain in the neck. And then when he actually refers to his small share in the glorious revolution of the United States, I find that very, very moving that he does that. In any case, it's a lovely letter, and I'm so pleased. I really, really applaud the Inspector General's office for taking this time to celebrate and to acknowledge one of our founding fathers who really did not always receive his due.
The language is just so beautiful, and what a command of the language. And then also the use of the word expectations.
Yeah,
it's a big word for me. I talk about this with my class all the time. In the end, our lives are filled with expectations, and the roles that we play have expectations attached to them. And I'm wondering, either of you can respond to this, but that as our political lives, our democracy or our representative democracy has gone forward, we've seen people's expectations get lowered. They get lowered and lowered and lowered. And as Inspector Lang was trying to say earlier, there are good things about government. There are good people trying to solve problems in government. But we, in many ways, lose when the expectations get lowered. And I think that comes right back to this issue of the Inspector General, because that office can try to raise some expectations. Yes?
Absolutely. And an event like last night is important to me, of course, to celebrate my office and the 40 years of work that those committed public servants have done around public integrity. Also, to really bring the public in to the work of public integrity. But using history as a lens to think about why government matters is a really useful tool for people of all ages. And I think that this is a legacy that I'm so fortunate to have inherited from my parents who are lovers of the arts, in addition to the fact that my father is an actor, of course, is the way that the arts can help illuminate the things that matter, including government. And so one fun element that we added, since you are a UAlbany guy, is we invited members of the UAlbany music department to reprise a song about the Baron that was written for the World's Fair in the 60s that is a real hoot. And they just did an outstanding
What's the
job.
name of the song? Do you remember?
I don't know, Baron von Steuben or something like that. But we'll have to send
von
you a recording.
Steuben song.
Yes.
Eins, zwei, drei, vier.
Baron von Steuben was here.
Baron Friedrich Wilhelm Gerhard Augustine von Steuben burst in the USA one cold December day. 1777 was the year, and his services were badly needed here.
Baron Friedrich Wilhelm Gerhard Augustine von Steuben went down to Valley Forge, looked around and said, Herr George, seems to me your army is kaput. Everybody's marching on a different foot.
It's a wonderfully silly and hummable song that I first heard in '64 and has been ringing in my mind ever since.
And we found it on vinyl, and mercifully, these students were willing to take it on.
And finally, young people know what vinyl is again.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, you think about it, though, compared to where von Steuben came from, we are in our infancy, aren't we?
That's one way to look at it.
I don't know. I mean, maybe, hopefully, we're not in our dotage at this point. I mean, we should always be evolving. You know, it seems to me that lowering expectations has become kind of a policy in a sense. And that's completely backwards. We should have high expectations of our government, of our nation, of our people. And what do they replace expectation with? They replace it with fear. And a little while ago, when you asked the Inspector General how she found the nerve to speak out, I was reminded of one of my heroes, Pete Seeger, who sang when he sang.
And one of ours. He was the patron saint of this radio station, and I spent many hours with him down in Beacon at his home.
Wow.
And one of the verses to We Shall Overcome is, we are not afraid.
That's right.
We are not afraid. And then Seeger would say, but of course we are afraid. We are afraid, but yet we sing it and we say it. And I think that needs to be a practical philosophy right now. There is tremendous fear in speaking out, but the alternative is much, much worse.
And I always thought of it this way, Inspector Lang and Stephen, the true patriot is the person who's willing to stand up and say when their government's going in the wrong direction, not the person who waves the flag and says, yes, how may I help? How high should I jump for you?
Yeah.
Yes,
absolutely.
and inspectors general are charged with doing just that in government. We are not in it to toot government's horn. We are in it to be the public's eyes and ears on the inside. And it's an honor to be able to serve in that position. So I'll remind New Yorkers who suspect fraud or corruption in state government to report it to us at 1-800-DO-RIGHT. And, of course, to follow us at New York State IG.
Inspector Lucy Lang, can you tell us about an investigation you've got coming up? Anything you're working on right now or looking at that we should know about?
Ooh, we are always working on all kinds of things I can't tell you a word about. But I will say that we are continuing our focus on the State Department of Corrections. It is an area of real passion for me as a former prosecutor and a prison educator. I've visited every prison across New York State, and more than half of the complaints we receive every year are related to the state prison system, which, of course, is only one of the over 100 agencies over which we have jurisdiction. So we will continue our work addressing the complaints and concerns that come out of the prison system, and look forward to continuing to illuminate where we can the need for change behind bars.
Yeah, and we have seen quite upheaval in the prison system. We've had prison guards accused of murder and convicted, and we've had all sorts of problems when it comes to how prisoners are treated. We have what's called an omnibus prison reform bill that passed the legislature. When you listen to the Republicans, they argue that it's not omnibus, it needs more, and I'm guessing they may have a point. What do you think about that bill? Is it enough? Do we need to do more?
I think it's critically important that I not take a position on legislation. My job is to conduct investigations without fear or favor, and not to back up the legislature or the executive branch, but really to call balls and strikes. So I will implement the law to the best of my ability.
I like it. I like it. See, there's that toughness right there. But I had to ask the question.
Fair enough. But while we're talking about the dark sides of government and the agencies that require constant attention, I want to lift up another agency I've been very fortunate to work closely with over the past year, including on last night's event, which is the New York State Parks and Historic Preservation. And they are the custodians for the Baron's final resting place, which includes the small cottage where he penned the letter that you've just heard. And they are also the custodians of myriad objects that are of deep importance to New York's history. And this year, as we celebrate America 250 and imagine what lies ahead for the Republic, I hope that New Yorkers will take advantage of the really rich offerings that we have in the state parks all across the state, including the historic sites.
Well, this has been a half hour that's gone by way too fast. You don't get every day to do an interview with two folks like this. And I want to say thanks to Stephen Lang and Inspector General Lucy Lang for being with us on the Capitol Connection this week. We, of course, will have you, Inspector General, back. And of course, I'd love to talk to you anytime, Stephen. I have so many questions that won't get asked today. But for your work on this, thank you so much. And I can only hope that we'll cross paths in the future.
I hope so. Thank you very much for having me on, David.
Inspector General Lang, thank you.
Thank you, David, and happy birthday, offices of the New York State Inspector General.
Yes, happy birthday.
Support for the Capital Connection comes from
United University Professions, representing 37,000 academic and professional employees at SUNY campuses and teaching hospitals across New York State. Frederick E. Cole, President, uupinfo.org.